Millionaire arrives home early and sees his wife pushing his daughter. His reaction will shock you. Daniel Harrington was a name known to both the medical community and the media. At 43, he was already one of the world's leading cardiac surgeons, praised as a man of steel, disciplined, cold, precise down to every second of his life. Patients, colleagues, and even the press saw in him someone who never allowed emotions to interfere with his work. But few knew that behind that icy wall, Daniel carried a deep wound, the death of his wife Rachel, the woman he had once considered the only light in his life. Since the day she died in a car accident, his vast home had been drowned in silence. The only thing that kept him going was his little daughter, Emily, just 6 years old. Emily was the last piece holding Daniel upright in life. Every packed schedule, every emergency surgery, every international conference trip revolved around whether he could make it home in time to be with her. He once believed that by rearranging his life, by giving his broken heart a new chance, he could bring Emily a complete home. And that was why he proposed to Victoria Hale, a young, elegant, attractive woman who knew how to appear perfect before the public. To many, Victoria was the perfect piece for Daniel's life. That afternoon, on what seemed like an ordinary day, Daniel finished surgery earlier than expected and decided to return home. He wanted to give Emily a surprise evening, a warm dinner with her father, perhaps even a fairy tale book before bed. As his luxury car turned onto the private road leading to the Harrington estate, Daniel felt a gentle joy. He imagined Emily running into his arms, or Victoria's tender gaze upon seeing him home early. His footsteps echoed across the wide marble hallway. The house was still, unnaturally quiet. No child's laughter, no familiar voice. He set his briefcase down on the table and softly called, "Emily? Victoria?" No answer. But then an unexpected sound rang out, sharp and strangled, a small, panicked scream. Daniel froze. His heart seemed to stop in that instant. The scream came from the backyard, where the turquoise pool gleamed in the afternoon sun. Abandoning everything, Daniel rushed toward the yard. The sight before him made his whole body go numb. Victoria, her face cold, was pushing Emily toward the pool's edge. The little girl's casted arm flailed helplessly in the air, struggling to keep balance. "Victoria!" Daniel roared, his voice mixed with fury and fear. Victoria turned, her lips curling into a crooked smile. She feigned surprise, trying to cover it with a sweet tone. "Daniel, you're home early. We were just playing. Emily has to learn to overcome her fear of water, after all." But Emily was thrashing in desperation, her wide eyes filled with terror. Without thinking, Daniel plunged into the pool, fully clothed, swimming toward his daughter. He pulled her up, and Emily clung tightly to his soaked shirt. He could smell the sharp chlorine mixed with her tears. Victoria walked closer, putting on a mask of concern. "I didn't think it was that serious. You're just overreacting." But Daniel no longer heard a word. The whole world seemed to fade, leaving only Emily trembling in his arms. In that moment, a thought pierced his mind like a cold blade. This was no accident. Without another word, he carried Emily upstairs to change her clothes and dry her hair. As night fell, the mansion grew silent. Emily had drifted off to sleep, but Daniel could not. The image of Victoria pushing his daughter toward the pool haunted him like a ghost. His instincts told him this was not the first time. A chilling fear rose within him, freezing him to the bone. He stood up and walked toward his study. In a secret drawer, he kept the controller for the hidden camera system he had once installed to protect Emily. He had never thought he would need to use it. But that night, he turned on the screen and prepared to face the truth. The green glow of the screen illuminated the quiet study. Daniel sat motionless before the replaying footage, his hand clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Each frame appeared like a blade, cutting deep into his heart. Before his eyes, Victoria, the woman he had trusted to bring into his life, into his daughter's home, revealed her true self. No longer the gentle figure or the perfect public smile, but instead raw cruelty. In one clip, Emily clutched her small teddy bear, Charlie, the only toy left from her mother. Victoria yanked it from her hands, hurled it to the floor, then coldly kicked it away. Emily quickly bent down, tears streaming, her tiny trembling hand picking it back up. Daniel could almost feel his heart shatter in that moment. The next scene was even more brutal. Victoria forced Emily to eat by shoving food into her mouth, ignoring the tears running down her face. "Eat! You must learn to be stronger." Victoria's sharp, cold voice rang out, making Daniel shudder. In another recording, Emily sat silently on the sofa. Victoria approached, her face full of anger, and shoved hard, sending the small body sprawling backward. Emily did not cry out, only clutched her arm, her wide eyes filled with fear. Daniel bent over, his hands covering his face. Each image was like a hammer blow to a father's heart. He had thought Victoria would be a new companion, would bring stability for Emily. But no, she had turned the house into a prison and his daughter into a victim. Then the screen flickered with a familiar scene. Daniel held his breath. The image of Victoria dragging Emily to the pool appeared, the girl's casted arm struggling weakly. Exactly as he had witnessed that afternoon, except this time he had not been there to stop it. Emily writhed, trying to resist in vain. A strangled sob escaped Daniel's throat. He no longer had any doubts. Victoria was not only irresponsible, but a real threat. The pain turned into a burning fire of anger. Daniel clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. But then that fury was replaced by a cold determination. He would not let another day pass in helplessness. Emily must be safe. He turned off the screen, and the room was plunged into darkness. Daniel rose and looked toward the hallway leading to his daughter's bedroom. There, Emily slept peacefully, clutching Charlie tightly in her small arms. In his mind echoed a vow. "You will never have to be afraid again. I promise." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, lighting the large living room. He stepped into the main room, where Victoria was perched on the sofa, flipping through a fashion magazine as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," Daniel's voice rang out, deep and cold, yet containing an unpredictable danger. Victoria looked up, smiling charmingly, as if last night had never occurred. "Still angry about last night, my love? I already explained. It was just a misunderstanding." Daniel said nothing, then pulled a thick file from his briefcase. He threw it onto the table, papers and printed photos from the cameras scattered everywhere. The images were indisputable. Victoria snatching the toy, force-feeding, shoving the little girl down. The smile on Victoria's lips vanished. Her face went pale, her hand trembling as she touched a photograph. This isn't true," she stammered. Daniel looked straight into her eyes, his voice cold as steel. "It is exactly the truth. You have abused my daughter. You have crossed a line that must never be crossed." Victoria sprang to her feet, trying to regain control. "Daniel, you must understand. I was only trying to discipline her. Emily needs discipline. She can't grow up as a weak child." Daniel's hand slammed hard onto the table with a dry, sharp sound. "She needs love, not your cruelty." Victoria took a step forward, but he raised his hand to block her, his tone like a cutting blade. "Pack your things. As of today, you have no place in this house." Victoria stared at him, her eyes full of both anger and fear. "You think you can throw me away that easily? You're Daniel Harrington, the perfect doctor the world admires. Think about what the press will write. The ideal man abandons his perfect fiancée." Daniel did not answer her. He took out his phone and dialed, "Jonathan Reed. I need an emergency restraining order, and prepare the lawsuit documents immediately." The calm voice of the lawyer sounded on the other end. "I'll be there within an hour." Victoria was stunned. The sweet mask on her face began to crack, revealing a dark hatred. "You will regret this, Daniel. I swear it." But Daniel did not flinch. His eyes met Victoria's steadily, and he said, "You have 15 minutes to get out of my house." Just 2 days after Victoria walked out of the Harrington house, the storm began. Television channels, online newspapers, and social media filled with images of her weeping in front of the cameras, portraying herself as the victim of a powerful, ruthless man. "He threw me out of the house without any reason," Victoria sobbed in an interview. "I only wanted to love and take care of Emily, but Daniel never trusted me." Public opinion was divided. Some believed her, saying Daniel was a cold man, but to him all those words were meaningless. He cared about only one thing: Emily's safety. Jonathan Reed, his lawyer, remained calm in the face of the media storm. "Let them talk," he stressed. "We don't answer the press. We present the evidence in court. Justice will speak for us." The day of the trial arrived, the court crowded with reporters and onlookers. Victoria entered with a flawless appearance, pure white dress, carefully applied makeup, eyes shimmering with tears. She stood at the witness stand, her voice trembling. "I sacrificed everything for Daniel and Emily, but then I was betrayed, cast out of the house mercilessly." Some in the audience nodded with sympathy. Daniel sat in silence, his gaze fixed only on the small bag Emily clutched in the back row seat, where Charlie the teddy bear was. When it was Jonathan's turn to rise, he placed a hard drive containing all the camera footage on the judge's desk. The large screen lit up. The entire room fell silent. One by one, the recordings appeared. Victoria snatching the teddy bear, forcing Emily to eat through tears, shoving the little girl on the sofa. And then, the final scene made the courtroom hold its breath. Victoria dragging Emily to the pool, the girl's casted arm struggling weakly. Victoria's face turned pale, her trembling hand clutching the edge of the stand. The false tears seemed frozen. Murmurs of anger spread through the crowd. The judge struck the gavel forcefully. "Order!" Then she looked directly at Victoria, her voice firm. "The evidence is clear. Ms. Victoria Hale is hereby subjected to a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Emily Harrington. Any attempt to approach will be considered a criminal act." Daniel closed his eyes and exhaled. What filled him was not pride, but a profound relief. Justice had finally chosen to stand on his daughter's side. Victoria was escorted out of the courtroom, the once arrogant face now reduced to nothing but the shadow of defeat. Daniel turned to Emily. The little girl looked up at her father, her eyes full of trust. In that moment, Daniel understood he had just reclaimed the most precious thing, his daughter's childhood and safety. The trial was over, the gavel's echo still lingering in Daniel's ears. Yet he knew this was only the first step. Jonathan Reed wasted no time and moved forward with the divorce paperwork. Daniel agreed immediately. For him, this marriage that had never truly been completed had nothing left to save. In the closed conference room of the family court, there were no cameras, no reporters. Only Daniel, Victoria, 2 lawyers, and a neutral judge. The atmosphere was heavy, tense like a taut string. Victoria appeared with a carefully made-up face, but her eyes revealed exhaustion and anger. She tried to maintain an air of elegance, but the failure in the previous trial had rendered all her words meaningless. "I won't sign," Victoria declared coldly, her voice echoing in the room. "I will not let him destroy my reputation," Jonathan calmly replied. "Mrs. Hale, the evidence is already overwhelming. You not only lost custody, but are also under a restraining order. Dragging this out will only make things worse for you." Daniel sat still, his gaze sharp and cold. He no longer wanted to argue. He only wanted it to end. After many hours of tense negotiation, Victoria finally signed. The trembling pen left a crooked line of ink on the divorce paper. She looked at Daniel one last time, her eyes burning with hatred. "You will pay. You have destroyed my life." Daniel did not respond. He stood up and signed his name firmly. The document was handed back to the judge, the sound of the red seal stamping down like a declaration of finality. On his way out of the room, Daniel met Jonathan. The lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice deep and steady. "This is the end for her, Daniel, but it's also a new beginning for you and Emily." Daniel gave a slight nod. In his heart, there was no joy, only release. He knew this door had closed, and now there was only one path left, to take Emily in search of healing. In the days following the trial, life in the Harrington mansion changed completely. The house that had once been filled with tension and fear now sank into a fragile peace. But Daniel knew well, simply removing Victoria was not enough. The wounds in Emily's soul would not vanish overnight. One quiet afternoon, as he entered Emily's room, Daniel discovered a small diary hidden deep in the desk drawer, as if the little girl had wanted to bury her fears inside. He opened a few pages, and his heart ached as he read the trembling lines. "I'm scared. I'm so scared." His hand shook slightly, as though someone had gripped his chest tight. Daniel understood that his daughter needed more than her father's love. Emily needed a place to heal, to erase the shadows that had scarred her tender soul. Jonathan Reed introduced him to Harbor of Light, a therapy center for children who had experienced trauma. Rachel, Daniel's late wife, had once supported the place through charitable work. Now it could be the very refuge Emily needed. On the first day at Harbor of Light, Emily clutched her father's hand tightly, refusing to let go even for a step. She held Charlie, the worn old teddy bear, close to her chest, her wide eyes full of wariness. Daniel bent down and whispered, "You're safe now, Emily. I'm right here." The door to the therapy room opened, and a gentle voice greeted them. Dr. Claire Bennett stepped forward, a young psychologist with a warm smile and eyes that knew how to listen. She did not rush to ask questions or press the child. Instead, she sat down on the floor, pulled out a box of colorful wooden blocks, and began stacking them one by one. Emily hid behind Daniel's leg, silently watching. Claire said nothing, just continued to build the wooden tower, occasionally looking up to smile at the girl. After a while, Emily hesitated, then, with a trembling hand, placed another block onto the tower. That moment left Daniel speechless. A tiny gesture, yet filled with immense hope. Claire looked at him and gave a small nod. "This is a good start. She doesn't need to speak yet, only to feel safe." In the days that followed, Daniel patiently brought Emily to Harbor of Light. At first, she only observed. Then gradually, Emily began to join in the games, draw pictures, even sit beside Claire for longer periods. The first drawings were filled with dark gray and deep blue, but soon bright yellows and greens appeared, signs that trust was returning. One afternoon, Daniel picked up a drawing that had fallen to the floor. On it, Emily had scrawled a single word in red crayon. "Daddy." He froze. Tears welled up in his eyes. Without a spoken word, that single one said everything. His daughter was finding her lost voice again. That night, as he carried Emily down the hallway, Daniel heard a sound as soft as a breeze. A laugh, faint but enough to make him stop, his eyes blurred with tears. Emily rested her head on his shoulder and giggled softly. For Daniel, it was a miracle. He knew the road ahead was long, but this was the first light after a stretch of darkness. And he swore to himself, for the rest of his life, he would devote himself to keeping that light alive. Harbor of Light quickly became Emily's second home. Every week, Daniel brought his daughter to the center, and every day he sat in the waiting room, quietly watching from afar. There, he gradually realized something. There was one person who played a special role in Emily's recovery. Dr. Claire Bennett. Claire had a very different approach. She did not rush, did not force. When Emily was silent, Claire was silent too. When Emily simply placed a block on the tower or drew a clumsy circle on paper, Claire smiled encouragingly as if it were a great victory. Her patience created a safe space where Emily could slowly regain her trust. One afternoon, Emily brought her father a drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a blue sky. One was Daniel, one was herself, and the third, with long hair flowing in the wind, was clearly Claire. Beneath the picture, Emily had scrawled a short word, "Us." Daniel froze, his eyes brimming with tears. He turned to look at Claire, who was standing at the door, her gaze gentle, yet also uncertain. That evening, Jonathan came by the house and sat with him in the living room. Daniel told him everything that was on his mind, and Jonathan quietly replied, "The little girl already sees her as part of the family. Maybe it's time you thought about that too." Daniel sighed. "I don't want to replace Rachel. I'm afraid that if I take another step forward, I'll be betraying her memory." Jonathan took his hand, his eyes firm. "Rachel would never want you to live in the dark forever. She wanted Emily to be loved, and she wanted you to find your smile again." In the days that followed, Daniel tried to keep his distance, but Claire continued to appear, not loud, not imposing, just with her gentle presence. One evening, she stopped by the house to bring therapy materials for Emily. When the door opened, Emily immediately ran over, holding out her favorite comic book and begging, "Read it to me." Daniel stood watching, his heart tightening. Emily nestled against Claire, listening to each story with shining eyes. That was the moment he realized Claire was not only helping Emily heal, but also bringing his daughter a sense of family, something he alone could never fully replace. That night, before turning off the lights, Emily whispered softly, "I like it when Miss Claire is here. It feels like home." Daniel's throat tightened. He softly replied, "So do I, Princess." Inside him, a truth slowly became clear. Perhaps love was not a betrayal of the past, but a way to continue living, to continue loving. For Emily, for Rachel, and for himself. Life had changed in a way that could never be reversed. In the past, Daniel lived only to work. Now he worked in order to live and to take care of Emily. A schedule once crammed with meetings now gave way to family breakfasts or leisurely afternoons in the park. One day, the memory of Rachel's unfinished dream came rushing back, the dream of living in a peaceful house by the sea. He decided to make it a reality. Daniel smiled, bent down, and whispered, "Shall we go live somewhere else, Princess?" They moved to a quiet seaside town. The salty taste of the wind, the murmur of the waves, the fine sand beneath their feet. Everything blended into a miracle. Emily's eyes widened as if she were discovering a whole new world. On the sand, Daniel handed her a seashell that had belonged to Rachel. "Your mother always wanted to bring you here. This was her favorite place." Emily held the shell in her hand, looked at the blue sea, and softly whispered, "Hello, Mommy?" Daniel's heart ached, yet at the same time was filled with an extraordinary peace. Father and daughter knelt down, placing the seashell at the water's edge so the waves could gently touch it. A small but sacred ritual, both a farewell and a new beginning. As the day faded and they walked back to their new home, Emily looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy, for taking care of me." Daniel lifted her high into his arms, his eyes stinging. "I always will, sweetheart, forever." In the months that followed, life in the seaside house changed in ways Daniel had never imagined. Every corner of the home was filled with color. Emily's drawings taped across the walls, framed photos of father and daughter, and pictures of the three of them with Claire hanging throughout the house, along with the sound of pure laughter echoing down the hallways. Claire had now moved to live next door to the father and daughter. She was not only Emily's psychologist, but had also become a companion to them both. Sometimes, Daniel sat on the balcony watching Claire and Emily planting flowers together in the garden. The afternoon sun stretched out, lighting up their faces like a painting of peace. In that moment, he realized happiness was not far away. It lived in the small things, in his daughter's smile, and in the warm presence of someone who knew how to listen. One evening, after Emily had gone to sleep, Daniel and Claire sat together in the living room. No words were needed, only the ticking of the clock. Finally, Daniel spoke softly. "I have lived too long in the shadows of the past, but you have helped me realize love is not betrayal. It is the way to keep on living." Claire quietly took his hand. There were no flowery promises, only sincerity. And that was enough for Daniel to know. His family had entered a new chapter. A few months later, the three of them walked together along the seashore. Emily ran across the sand, laughing, then picked up a pure white seashell. She looked up, her voice clear and bright. "Mommy would be so happy, wouldn't she, Daddy?" Daniel froze. He looked at Claire and saw her give a gentle smile, her eyes filled with empathy. He knelt beside Emily, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "That's right, Princess. Mommy would be very happy to see you smiling like this." Emily cheerfully went to collect more shells. She carefully arranged them into the shape of a heart, her sparkling eyes brimming with joy. "All done," Emily shouted, her voice ringing with delight. "Daddy, Miss Claire, come here." Claire laughed, surprised to see the heart of seashells spread across the sand. But before she could ask, Daniel turned to her with a deep look in his eyes. He knelt down in the middle of the heart, his hand trembling, but his gaze unwavering. "Claire," his voice trembled with emotion, "you walked into our lives and turned darkness into light. You gave Emily back her laughter, and you gave me back my heart. I thought it was frozen forever, but you made it alive again. Will you marry me and let us write the rest of this story together?" The sea breeze lifted Claire's long hair. Tears welled up. She covered her mouth with her hand, then laughed with happiness. "Yes, Daniel, I will." Emily clapped her hands, cheering and dancing around them. Daniel slid the glittering ring onto Claire's finger, then stood and embraced her. On the empty beach, only the sound of waves bore witness to their eternal promise. A few months later, that same beach became the setting of their wedding. White chairs lined up in long rows, fresh flowers fluttered in the wind. Emily was the little bridesmaid, holding a basket of flowers, her smile radiant. When Claire walked in, dressed in a pure white gown, Daniel looked at her as if the whole world had stopped. They exchanged vows beneath the setting sun. Daniel whispered, "I promise to love and protect you just as I promised Emily. From now on, we are a family." Claire softly replied, her voice trembling, "I promise to love you and the children with all my heart." Their kiss blended with the sound of the sea, opening a new chapter. 4 years had passed since the day Daniel proposed to Claire on the beach, and since the wedding filled with the scent of the sea and the glow of the sunset. Time had brought them not only new challenges, but also precious gifts, a complete home where love and healing coexisted. The seaside house was now filled with laughter. The kitchen table always carried the smell of baked goods. The backyard had a small corner where Emily planted flowers with Claire, while Liam, the 3-year-old boy, played in the dirt with messy hands. Emily was now 10, a radiant and confident girl. The old wounds were nothing more than distant memories. She loved reading, loved writing little stories, and more than once mentioned her dream of becoming a writer to write about the beautiful things in life. Every time Daniel heard her say that, he only smiled, his heart overflowing with pride. Liam, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's mischievous smile, brought new energy to the whole family. He was living proof that love could sprout from old scars and turn them into strength for the present. One summer afternoon, they returned together to the beach, the place of every beginning and the keeper of so many memories. Emily and Liam ran across the sand, chasing the little waves, then picked seashells together. Emily carefully arranged them into the shape of a small palace, while Liam sat laughing, splashing seawater with his tiny hands. Daniel and Claire walked hand in hand along the shore. He softly said, "Do you remember the first time we came here with Emily?" Claire rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Back then, she trembled and closed herself off. Now look, she's teaching her little brother how to build a sandcastle." Daniel smiled, his eyes misting with emotion. Suddenly, from afar, a familiar figure appeared. A woman in a beige dress, thinner than before, her eyes carrying exhaustion. It was Victoria. She walked slowly along the beach, no longer with the proud, dazzling aura. Only a trace of melancholy remained. Emily stopped, holding Liam's hand, staring at the woman. Daniel gently tightened his grip on Claire's hand, slowing his pace. In all 4 years, he had never once seen Victoria since the trial and the divorce. In that moment, only a few steps separated them. Victoria looked up and met Daniel's eyes. For an instant, old memories surged back, tears, anger, fear. But Daniel only gave a slight smile, his gaze calm, free of hatred. Claire smiled softly too, while Emily pulled Liam behind her, clutching her father's hand tightly. Victoria stood still, her lips trembling. She seemed about to speak, but then held back. Her gaze fell on the seashell heart Emily had just shaped in the sand. A shadow of sorrow crossed her face before she turned away, her figure fading into the waves and sea breeze. Daniel watched her go and let out a quiet sigh. Claire squeezed his hand gently. "The past is behind us now, Daniel." He nodded. "Yes, and we've stepped into a new chapter." The sun sank lower, casting gold across the horizon. Emily and Liam ran toward their parents, their smiles radiant. Daniel bent down to embrace both children in his arms, while Claire stood beside him, her hair blowing in the wind. In that moment, he knew. Though darkness had once engulfed them, they had found the light. This family was living proof that love was stronger than every wound, and that happiness could be reborn, even from ruins. The 4 of them held hands, walking under the vast sky. The waves washed away their footprints, but in their hearts, the marks of love would remain forever. A true home, not perfect, but eternal.